In July 2011, the bodies of Daniel and Claire Whitmore, a newlywed couple from New York, were discovered inside Suite 417 at the Ivory Sun Resort and Spa in Cape Town, South Africa. What should have been a dream honeymoon ended in a scene of quiet horror, both victims poisoned, their final moments spent in agony. An investigation into their deaths uncovered a shocking past, revealing a tangled web of betrayal, obsession, and revenge. In June 2011, just days before the wedding, a woman from Daniel's past, Amelia Carson, resurfaced. A woman who had been left behind, discarded, and forgotten. But Amelia wasn't willing to be erased. The events leading up to that fateful night had begun 3 years earlier, in 2008, when Daniel and Amelia's relationship first took root. A relationship that, over time, would spiral into deception, heartbreak, and a plan for murder. On the morning of July 10, 2011, the Ivory Sun Resort and Spa in Cape Town, South Africa, awoke to a routine that had played out thousands of times before. The golden rays of the African sun spilled across the white sand beaches, waves whispered against the shore, and honeymooners, still caught in the haze of love, lounged beneath umbrellas sipping cocktails. But inside Suite 417, time had already stopped. It was 8:45 a.m. when the knock came. The housekeeping staff had been assigned to clean the honeymoon suite just as they had done the previous morning. When there was no answer, the worker assumed the couple was still sleeping. Honeymooners often lost track of time, caught up in the thrill of new love, the lazy comfort of a vacation where reality didn't exist. But something about the silence behind the door felt off. She knocked again, no response. 8:50 a.m., she retrieved the master key. The moment the door opened, the first thing she noticed was the stillness, a heavy, suffocating quiet that did not belong in a place meant for celebration. The air inside was thick, carrying an odd mixture of expensive cologne, wine, and something metallic beneath it. And then her eyes fell upon Claire Whitmore. Claire's motionless body was the first sight to shatter the illusion of a perfect honeymoon suite. She was slumped over the edge of the bed, her blonde hair cascading over her face, barely brushing against the white carpet below. Her skin was a ghastly pale, and the once vibrant blush of life had faded into something waxy, something unnatural. Dried blood stained the corner of her lips, a stark contrast against the light pink shade of lipstick she had worn the night before. The housekeeper's breath caught in her throat. Instinct told her to run, to leave, to pretend she had never opened this door. But her hands moved before her mind could process the horror. She reached for the hotel phone and, with trembling fingers, dialed the emergency number. Her voice cracked as she tried to explain what she had found. Her body shook so violently that she nearly dropped the receiver. She knew this wasn't something that could be undone. Whatever had happened in this room had already left its mark. It was 9:25 a.m. when the South African Major Crimes Unit arrived. Detective Lucas Vanderberg had seen his share of tragedies over the years, but something about this crime scene felt different. There was a coldness in the air, an eerie sensation that this was not a crime of passion, not a spontaneous act of rage. This was something else, something planned, something deliberate. As he stepped inside Suite 417, his trained eyes took in every detail. The bedside table had 2 half-filled glasses of red wine, their deep crimson liquid now laced with a murky residue. A small plate of half-eaten seafood sat on the room service tray, the untouched portions now carrying the scent of salt and decay. One chair in the room had been knocked over. And then there was Daniel Whitmore. His body was found in the ensuite bathroom, collapsed against the cool marble tiles, his legs sprawled at an unnatural angle. His face was frozen in agony, as though he had fought against the poison that coursed through his veins. His fingers were curled into stiff, claw-like shapes, a final, desperate attempt to hold on to life. Beside him, a shattered bottle of South African pinotage lay broken, its contents staining the floor in deep streaks of red. Detective Vandenberg had seen death before, but this scene left something unsettled in his gut. It was too quiet, too neat. There were no signs of struggle, no forced entry, no evidence of a violent altercation, and yet this was clearly a double homicide. Forensic specialists moved through the room, dusting surfaces, collecting samples. It was 11 a.m. when the first toxicology results came in. Cyanide, a lethal dose found in the wine, in the food, in the blood of both victims. There was no question this was planned, but by July 12, 2011, the case took an unexpected turn. Security footage from July 9, 2011 at 10:15 p.m. revealed a woman entering the Ivory Sun Resort lobby. Her face was partially obscured by a wide-brimmed hat, and she carried only a small black bag. She did not approach the front desk. Instead, she walked through the lobby with purpose, glancing once toward the elevators before disappearing out of the camera's frame. That woman was Amelia Carson. Detective Vandenberg reviewed the footage over and over. It didn't make sense. Who was she? Why was she here? The hotel registry contained no record of her name. She had not booked a room, had not signed in as a guest, and yet she had been there just hours before the newlyweds died. Then came the most chilling discovery. Amelia Carson wasn't just any woman, she was Daniel Whitmore's former lover. Her name surfaced in old phone records, in past travel itineraries, in financial statements from years before. Their affair had begun in 2008 and had ended without warning. Amelia had been left behind, forgotten. There had been no confrontation, no closure. Daniel had simply erased her from his life the moment he was ready to commit to Claire. But now she had found him again, and this time she wasn't going to be ignored. By July 13th, 2011, a search for Amelia Carson had already begun. But there was one problem. She was gone, disappeared without a trace. By June 25th, 2011, Daniel and Claire Whitmore stood beneath the towering oaks of a Hamptons estate, surrounded by the laughter and applause of 200 wedding guests. The sun dipped behind the horizon, casting a golden hue over the manicured lawns. The string quartet played softly, and champagne flowed freely. To everyone in attendance, it was a fairy tale wedding, a union of two successful, beautiful people embarking on a perfect life together. But Claire didn't know that just 12 hours earlier, her new husband had been lying in a dimly lit Manhattan hotel suite, tangled in the sheets with a woman who thought she still had his heart. Amelia Carson had spent nearly 3 years believing Daniel was the one. Their relationship had been a thrilling secret, one built on stolen weekends in luxury hotels, whispered phone calls at odd hours, and the promise that one day Daniel would finally choose her. That belief had started to unravel in early 2011 when Daniel became distant. The excuses came more frequently, the meetings ran later, the texts went unanswered. Then in June 2011 everything changed. Daniel confessed. He was getting married. Claire was the one he had chosen. Amelia had been a mistake. But on June 24th, 2011, the night before his wedding, Daniel called her. He said he was having doubts, that Claire wasn't what he wanted, that he needed to see Amelia one last time. She went to him. That night in a high-rise hotel overlooking Manhattan, Amelia let herself believe that this was the moment Daniel would finally prove his love. They drank expensive wine, whispered about the future, and for the first time in months, Amelia felt like she had won. By morning, Daniel was gone, He blocked her number, he deleted their messages, he walked down the aisle with Claire and promised her forever. For weeks, Amelia tried to make sense of it. She called him, she emailed, she waited for an explanation, but there was only silence. Then, on July 6th, 2011, she saw it. A photo posted by Claire, glowing and smiling beside Daniel on the beaches of Cape Town. The caption was simple: "Forever starts now, #Whitmore honeymoon." And just like that, Amelia snapped. By July 6th, 2011, Daniel and Claire had settled into their honeymoon routine at the Ivory Sun Resort and Spa. Their days were filled with private yacht cruises, wine tastings, and candle-lit dinners on the sand. It was paradise. But Daniel had no idea that Amelia had arrived the day before. She checked in on July the 5th, 2011, using a fake name, Veronica Daniels. She had flown in on a one-way ticket carrying only a small black suitcase. She wasn't there for the beaches. She wasn't there for closure. She was there for revenge. On July 8th, 2011, Claire unknowingly sealed her fate. That night, she posted another photo, this time from the resort's private beachside restaurant. The sun had just begun to set, casting a pink glow across the white tablecloth, the half-empty wine glasses, and Daniel's hand resting gently over hers. Claire captioned it, "The happiest night of my life, #Whitmore honeymoon." The moment Amelia saw the post, something inside her snapped for good. She had spent weeks obsessing over every lie, every false promise. She had relived every touch, every whispered, "I love you," only to realize that none of it had ever been real. She had been discarded, erased, as if she had never mattered at all. She wasn't going to let Daniel forget her. On July 9th, 2011, Daniel and Claire had their final meal. The Ivory Sun Resort and Spa offered a private in-suite dining experience, a luxury reserved for honeymooners who wanted one night alone without interruptions. Daniel had arranged for a special honeymoon dinner, a bottle of South African Pinotage wine, a selection of Cape seafood dishes, handmade chocolates infused with vanilla bean. It was the perfect evening. But what Daniel didn't know was that there had been a 5-minute window, a moment when the meal was left unattended in their suite before it was served. The hotel's kitchen staff later confirmed that they never re-entered the suite after the meal had been delivered, but someone else had. At 11:45 p.m., the first signs of distress began. Guests in the adjacent suite later recalled hearing coughing, the kind that sounded violent, uncontrollable. It lasted several minutes, followed by what they described as a strange gurgling sound. Then, silence. At 12:10 a.m., Daniel staggered into the bathroom. He never came out. By the time housekeeping arrived at 8:45 a.m., it was already too late. Claire was found first. Her body draped over the edge of the bed, her lifeless eyes staring at the floor. Her lips were slightly parted, stained with traces of dried blood. Her fingers, stiff and cold, still clutched the edge of the sheets, as if she had tried to pull herself up before the poison overpowered her. Daniel was in the bathroom. His face frozen in an expression of agony, his body collapsed against the tile. The shattered wine bottle lay beside him, the deep red liquid mixing with the white powder of the poison that had ended his life. It had been quick, efficient, merciless, and Amelia Carson was already gone. By July 12th, 2011, the world already knew the names Daniel and Claire Whitmore. Their deaths had made headlines. A wealthy, newlywed couple poisoned in their honeymoon suite, their dream vacation turned into a nightmare. News anchors repeated the same words, a tragic and mysterious case unfolding in South Africa. But inside the Cape Town Major Crimes Unit, detectives weren't just following a story, they were following a killer. For Detective Lucas Vanderberg, the case had been unsettling from the start. There were no signs of forced entry, no missing valuables, and no evidence that pointed to an outsider breaking in. Whoever had done this had been calm, deliberate, and patient. The crime scene had been too perfect. By mid-afternoon on July 12th, forensic reports confirmed cyanide poisoning, a dose so lethal that death had been almost unavoidable. The poison had been laced into the wine, but even more disturbing was that traces were also found in the seafood dish. That meant whoever had done this had gone to extraordinary lengths to ensure both Daniel and Claire died, without exception. Then came the security footage. At 10:15 p.m. on July 9th, a woman entered the lobby of the Ivory Sun Resort and Spa. She didn't hesitate. She didn't pause. She walked straight through the marble-floored entrance, glancing only once in the direction of the elevators before disappearing from view. She carried a small black bag, her face partially obscured beneath the brim of a hat. That woman was Amelia Carson. By July 12, 2011, she was officially named a prime suspect. By July 16, 2011, the investigation had already gained international attention. News outlets in both the United States and South Africa followed every lead, speculating about who Amelia was, why she had followed the Whitmores to Cape Town, and most of all, where she had gone after the murder. Then, a break in the case. Footage from Cape Town International Airport showed Amelia attempting to board a flight. She wasn't rushing or panicking like a fugitive on the run. Instead, she was methodical. She had dyed her hair 2 shades darker, pulled into a tight bun, and her passport, which was registered under a different name, was flawless. She almost made it through, but something went wrong. At the final checkpoint, a routine scan flagged an irregularity in her identification records. The system held her for an additional 90 seconds, long enough for her to realize the risk. Before the authorities could arrive, she had slipped away, vanishing into the crowded terminal. By the time officers searched the airport, Amelia Carson was gone. On July 18, 2011, a woman checking into a motel in the outskirts of Cape Town caught the attention of the motel owner. Something about her seemed off. She paid in cash, avoided eye contact, and carried only a single backpack. She stayed in room 204, and for 2 nights, no one saw her leave. Then, on the morning of July 18th, a housekeeper entered the room for routine cleaning. She expected to find an empty bed, maybe an unmade sheet. Instead, she found the woman still there, sitting in complete darkness, her hands resting on her knees. She wasn't asleep. She wasn't watching TV. She was just sitting there. The housekeeper apologized, but the woman barely reacted. When asked if she wanted her room cleaned, she simply shook her head, a small, almost lifeless movement. The encounter disturbed the housekeeper so much that later that evening, she mentioned it to her employer. By 9 p.m., the motel owner watched the news report on the Whitmore case. He recognized the sketch of Amelia Carson instantly, but by the time the police arrived, room 204 was empty. On July 20, 2011, authorities uncovered a final piece of the puzzle, a small but significant transaction made at a hardware store in Johannesburg. At 3:45 p.m., a woman matching Amelia's new appearance, now with jet black hair and a baseball cap, purchased a set of scissors, a bottle of hair dye, and a pack of blank ID cards. She was preparing to disappear permanently. The store clerk remembered one strange detail. The woman barely spoke. She simply pointed at the items, slid the money across the counter, and walked out without waiting for change. It wasn't the behavior of someone planning a new life. It was the behavior of someone who had already given up. By July 22, 2011, it was only a matter of time. A hotel worker in Johannesburg, a man who had been following the case closely, noticed a woman who looked just a little too familiar. She was staying in a rented Airbnb on the outskirts of the city. She had checked in using a name that didn't match any known records. She didn't leave during the day. she ordered no meals. And when the police arrived hours later, breaking down the door to her rented room, they found her just as the housekeeper had found her days earlier. She was sitting in complete darkness. She didn't run, she didn't protest, she didn't ask why they were there. She simply looked up at the officers, her expression unreadable. Her only words, as they handcuffed her, "He promised me forever." By April 2012, the world had already decided who Amelia Carson was. The story of the Honeymoon murders had become an obsession for the media, a tale of love, betrayal, and revenge that felt too twisted to be real. News stations ran special segments, true crime forums dissected every new revelation, and journalists flooded the courthouse, waiting for the moment when justice would be served. Inside the cold, grey walls of the Seattle Superior Court, Amelia sat motionless, her expression unreadable. The same face that had once smiled in old photographs with Daniel Whitmore was now one of a woman stripped of everything. The trial had dragged on for months, but by April 10th, 2012, it was finally reaching its climax. The prosecution laid everything bare. They detailed the precise, methodical planning, how Amelia had purchased cyanide in her hometown, making sure she left no direct connection to the crime until it was too late. The receipts, retrieved from a pharmacy in downtown Seattle, showed she had bought the poison 6 weeks before the Whitmores even landed in Cape Town. The date of the purchase was February 28, 2011, long before she knew when or where the honeymoon would happen. That meant this wasn't impulse, this wasn't a moment of madness. This was a decision made in complete clarity. The security footage from the Ivory Sun Resort was played for the jury. The moment Amelia Carson stepped into the lobby on July 9, 2011 at 10:15 p.m., walking with purpose, carrying only a small black bag. The final proof that she had been there just hours before Daniel and Claire were found dead. The most damning testimony came from forensic experts who confirmed that the poison had been mixed carefully, ensuring that it took effect only after the victims had already consumed most of their meal. It had been a perfectly timed execution, not fast enough to arouse suspicion when they took their first bites, but powerful enough that by the time they felt its effects, it was already too late. Daniel died in agony. Claire died trying to reach for help. Amelia had made sure neither of them survived. By the time April 25, 2012 arrived, the trial had reached its most unforgiving moment, the jury's deliberation. The courtroom was filled to capacity, but the tension held the entire room in silence. Daniel's parents, Richard and Evelyn Whitmore, sat together in the front row, their hands clasped tightly, waiting for the verdict that would never bring their son back but might give them peace. Claire's younger sister, Melissa, barely looked up, her fingers gripping the silver bracelet Claire had gifted her on her 18th birthday. The jury took only 3 hours to decide that Amelia Carson would never walk free again. By April 26, 2012, the verdict was announced. Guilty. There was no outburst, no reaction from Amelia as the words rang through the courtroom. While gasps filled the room, while Claire's sister let out a choked sob, while Daniel's mother covered her face with shaking hands, Amelia didn't cry, didn't speak, didn't move. Her lack of emotion became the final note of the trial, the last unanswered question. Did she feel remorse? Regret? Did she wish she had walked away? Or did she believe, even now, that Daniel deserved to die for what he had done to her? Her sentencing was swift, life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The cameras flashed as she was led from the courtroom, but Amelia never looked up. She never turned to see the faces of the people she had destroyed. She never looked toward Melissa Whitmore, who sat with tears rolling down her face. She never acknowledged the family of the man she once swore she loved. She walked through the doors of the courtroom and disappeared. the woman who had spent years fighting for Daniel's love, now sentenced to spend the rest of her life in a prison cell, forgotten. The Honeymoon murders remained one of the most infamous cases of the decade. It was retold in documentaries, crime series, and books. Journalists debated whether Amelia Carson was a cold-blooded killer or a woman broken by heartbreak. But to the people who lost Daniel and Claire, there was no question. For them, justice had been served. Because for Daniel and Claire, forever lasted only 2 weeks, and for Amelia Carson it would last a lifetime behind bars. Make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on our daily updates, and you can check out another insane case we have, the case where a young teen girl murders her classmate after a college party. Make sure to check it out and let us know in the comment section.